What if I told you that the most successful car in automotive history started as a Nazi propaganda project, that this humble machine would go on to become a symbol of peace, love, and counterculture rebellion? This is the story of the Volkswagen Beetle, a car that sold over 23 million units across 91 countries and somehow managed to unite hippies, families, and dictators under one impossibly curved roof. Picture this. It's 1938 in Wolfsburg, Germany. Adolf Hitler stands before a gleaming production line, watching his vision of motorizing the German people take shape. The car rolling off that line looks nothing like the angular, aggressive machines of the era. It's round, almost friendly-looking, with a rear-mounted engine that defies conventional automotive wisdom. This is the KDF wagon, Kraft durch Freude, or strength through joy. What the world would come to know as the Volkswagen Beetle. Hitler called it the people's car. History would call it something far more complicated. The Beetle's origin story reads like a dark fairy tale. In the 1930s, while American families were cruising in their Ford Model Ts and Europeans remained largely confined to trains and bicycles, Hitler envisioned a Germany where every citizen could afford their own automobile. The criteria were specific and ambitious. The car had to carry 2 adults and 3 children at 100 kilometers per hour. It needed to consume no more than 7 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers. And most importantly, it had to cost no more than 1,000 Reichsmarks, about the price of a small motorcycle. To bring this vision to life, Hitler turned to Ferdinand Porsche. Yes, that Porsche. The same man whose name would later grace some of the world's most exclusive sports cars was tasked with creating the ultimate everyman's vehicle. Porsche had been tinkering with the concept of a small, affordable car since the 1920s, but it was Hitler's backing that gave him the resources to make it reality. Here's where it gets interesting. The engineering solutions Porsche developed weren't just clever, they were revolutionary for mass production. The rear-mounted air-cooled engine eliminated the need for a radiator, water pump, hoses, and antifreeze. No front-mounted engine meant no transmission tunnel running through the passenger compartment, creating more interior space despite the car's compact dimensions. The engine itself was a marvel of simplicity, a 985cc flat-4 that produced just 24 horsepower. That's less power than many modern lawnmowers. But it was bulletproof reliable. The body design followed a similar philosophy of radical simplicity. Every curve served a purpose. The teardrop shape minimized wind resistance while using the least amount of sheet metal possible. This wasn't just about aesthetics or even aerodynamics. In a nation still recovering from World War I and facing material shortages, efficiency in manufacturing was paramount. The separate fenders could be easily replaced if damaged. The split rear window, which would become iconic, was cheaper to manufacture than a single curved piece of glass. But here's the kicker. Of the 336,068 Germans who signed up for the Kraft durch Freude savings program, paying 5 Reichsmarks per week toward their future Volkswagen, not a single civilian received their car before World War II began. The Wolfsburg factory, purpose-built to produce 150,000 cars annually for the German people, was immediately converted to military production. Instead of people's cars, it churned out the Kübelwagen, the military utility vehicle based on the Beetle chassis, and the amphibious Schwimmwagen. Think about that for a second. The car designed to mobilize the masses became a tool of war. Hitler himself rode in a specially modified convertible version. The very vehicle meant to symbolize German prosperity and advancement was now carrying Nazi officers across battlefields. By war's end, the Wolfsburg factory was in ruins, having been bombed by the Allies. The dream of the people's car seemed dead. Enter Major Ivan Hurst, a British officer with an engineer's eye and a pragmatist's sensibility. When the British Army took control of the bombed-out Wolfsburg factory in 1945, Hearst saw opportunity where others saw scrap metal. The factory still had some tooling intact. More importantly, Europe desperately needed vehicles, any vehicles, to rebuild its shattered infrastructure. Hearst convinced the British Army to restart production, initially just to provide vehicles for occupying forces. The first post-war Beetles were crude affairs. They were painted in whatever color was available, often military green or beige, from leftover Wehrmacht supplies. Quality control was virtually non-existent. Workers, many of them former prisoners of war and displaced persons, were learning on the job. Yet by the end of 1945, they'd assembled 1,685 vehicles. By 1946, that number jumped to 10,020. The people's car was finally reaching the people, just not in the way Hitler had envisioned. Now, here's where the engineering really shines through. While other manufacturers were struggling to restart production with complex pre-war designs, the Beetle's simplicity became its greatest asset. The air-cooled engine didn't freeze in winter. The rear engine layout provided superior traction in snow. The sealed bottom protected mechanical components from road salt and moisture. European buyers, dealing with fuel shortages and damaged roads, found the Beetle's 35 miles per gallon and robust suspension ideal for post-war conditions. Heinrich Nordhoff deserves massive credit here. When he took over as managing director in 1948, Volkswagen was producing about 20,000 cars annually. Nordhoff, a former Opel executive who understood mass production, transformed Volkswagen from a struggling regional manufacturer into a global powerhouse. His philosophy was evolutionary, not revolutionary. Instead of dramatic model changes that would require expensive retooling, Nordhoff implemented continuous, small improvements. By 1972, the company claimed the Beetle had undergone over 5,000 modifications, though it looked essentially identical to the 1945 model. Let me put that in perspective. The 1946 Beetle had cable brakes, a crash box transmission, and 25 horsepower. The 1972 model had hydraulic brakes, a fully synchronized gearbox, and 60 horsepower from a 1,600cc engine. Same basic shape, completely different machine. The torsion bar suspension was refined year after year. The electrical system went from 6 to 12 volts. The heating system, always the Beetle's Achilles heel, was improved, though never quite fixed. But wait, there's more. The real genius wasn't in the engineering improvements, it was in the marketing. When Volkswagen decided to export the Beetle to the United States in 1949, they faced an almost impossible challenge. How do you sell a car designed by Nazis to Americans who had just spent 4 years fighting them? How do you convince buyers accustomed to chrome-laden land yachts with V8 engines to consider a tiny car with the engine in the wrong end? The answer came from an unlikely source. Bill Bernbach, a Jewish-American advertising executive, created what many consider the greatest automotive ad campaign in history. Instead of hiding the Beetle's quirks, Bernbach celebrated them. Think Small proclaimed one famous ad showing a tiny Beetle in a vast white space. Another read simply, "Lemon," explaining how Volkswagen's quality control rejected cars with even minor imperfections. These ads were revolutionary. While Detroit was selling fantasy and status, Volkswagen sold honesty and intelligence. The copy was witty, self-deprecating, and refreshingly honest. "After we paint the car, we paint the paint," explained one ad about the Beetle's multiple coats of finish. 0 to 60? Yes, read another, acknowledging the car's leisurely acceleration. The campaign treated consumers like adults capable of making rational decisions rather than emotional purchases. The numbers speak for themselves. In 1949, Volkswagen sold exactly 2 Beetles in America. By 1955, that number had grown to 30,000. By 1968, at the peak of Beatlemania, Volkswagen was moving 423,000 units annually in the United States alone. The Beetle had become America's best-selling import, commanding a 5% market share in a country that invented the automobile industry. So, what was actually going on under that curved skin? The engine that powered this phenomenon was a masterpiece of simplicity meeting durability. The flat-four configuration, also called a boxer engine, had horizontally opposed cylinders. This gave it perfect primary balance, no balance shafts needed. The cooling was managed entirely by a fan belt-driven blower and carefully designed cooling tins that directed air over the finned cylinders and heads. No water pump to fail, no radiator to leak, no antifreeze to change. The magnesium alloy crankcase saved weight while providing excellent heat dissipation. The crankshaft ran in 4 main bearings, oversized for the power output, which meant incredible longevity. The cam was gear-driven, eliminating timing chain failures. The valves were adjusted with simple screw and lock nut adjusters. Any shade tree mechanic could maintain this engine with basic hand tools. Compare that to the complex overhead valve V8s Detroit was producing, with their hydraulic lifters, multiple carburetors, and yards of vacuum hoses. The transmission was equally robust. The early crash boxes gave way to full synchromesh gearboxes by the 1960s. The transaxle design, integrating transmission and differential in one unit, was compact and efficient. The gear ratios were perfectly matched to the engine's narrow power band. First gear was a proper granny gear for starting on hills. Fourth was tall enough for economical cruising. The clutch was cable-operated, simple, reliable, and easy to adjust. Here's the thing about the Beetle's performance. It was never about speed. The 0-60 time for a 1960s Beetle was about 27 seconds. Top speed was theoretically 72 mph, though you'd need a long downhill and a tailwind to see it. Quarter-mile times were measured with a calendar, but the Beetle could maintain 60 mph all day long without stress. The engine was designed to run at 3,500 RPM continuously. In an era when American engines might last 75,000 miles before major work, Beetles routinely went 200,000 miles on the original engine. The suspension deserves special mention. The front used trailing arms with torsion bars, a system that provided a surprising amount of wheel travel for such a small car. The rear swing axles, while they could cause handling quirks at the limit, gave excellent traction and ride quality in normal driving. The whole system was virtually maintenance-free, no ball joints to wear out, no bushings to replace, just occasional greasing of a few zerks. But the real story wasn't just mechanical, it was cultural. As the 1960s dawned, America was changing. The post-war consensus was cracking. Young people were questioning authority, rejecting materialism, and searching for authenticity. The Beetle, with its anti-establishment image and practical virtues, became the perfect vehicle for this cultural moment. Literally. Consider the economics. A new 1967 Beetle cost $1,600. That's about $12,000 in today's money. A comparable American car cost nearly twice as much. Insurance was cheap because the car was cheap to repair. Gas mileage was exceptional for the era. Parts were plentiful and inexpensive. You could buy a used Beetle for a few $100s, and with basic mechanical knowledge, keep it running indefinitely. For young people and counterculture types operating on thin budgets, the Beetle wasn't just affordable, it was liberating. The Beetle became a canvas for self-expression. People painted them in psychedelic colors, covered them with flower decals, and modified them in countless ways. The simple body structure made customization easy. You could unbolt the fenders, remove the engine in 20 minutes, or swap bodies entirely. Cal look, Resto Cal, German look, rat rod, entire subcultures grew around Beetle modification. The aftermarket industry exploded with performance parts, dress-up accessories, and conversion kits. Then Hollywood entered the picture. When The Love Bug premiered in 1968, featuring Herbie, an anthropomorphic beetle with a mind of its own, The car's transformation from Nazi project to American icon was complete. The film was Disney's highest-grossing movie of 1969. 5 sequels followed. Herbie became as recognizable as Mickey Mouse. The Beetle wasn't just transportation anymore. It was a character, a friend, a member of the family. The timing was perfect. 1968 was the summer of love's hangover year. Vietnam was escalating. Cities were burning. Traditional American values were under assault. And here was this humble little car that seemed to exist outside all that conflict. It didn't care about status. It didn't make statements about power or wealth. It just worked day after day, asking little and giving much. Production numbers tell the tale. In February 1972, Beetle number 15734 rolled off the line, breaking the Ford Model T's long-standing record as the world's best-selling car. Volkswagen celebrated with a special edition, the Super Beetle, featuring improved suspension and a larger trunk. By now, the Beetle was being manufactured not just in Germany, but in Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, and other countries. It had become the first truly global car, but success bred complacency. While Volkswagen was celebrating production records, Japanese manufacturers were studying American consumers. Honda, Toyota, and Datsun arrived with cars that matched the Beetle's economy, but added modern features like decent heaters, comfortable seats, and reliable electrical systems. The Civic and Corolla didn't have the Beetle's character, but they didn't need constant valve adjustments either. The American emissions and safety regulations of the 1970s hit the Beetle hard. The air-cooled engine, never designed for emission controls, became increasingly strangled by pollution equipment. Catalytic converters and fuel injection helped, but added complexity and cost. The simple car was becoming less simple. Safety regulations demanded stronger bumpers, adding weight. The pure design was being compromised by regulation. By 1977, Volkswagen made a painful decision. Beetle production would end in Germany. The last German-built Beetle, a cabriolet, rolled off the line in Karmann's Osnabrück factory on January 19, 1980. After 16.5 million units, the car that rebuilt Germany's economy was no longer German. But the Beetle refused to die. Production continued in Mexico and Brazil, where the car's simplicity still made economic sense. Mexico, in particular, became the Beetle's second home. In Mexico City, the Vochos, as they were called, dominated the taxi fleet. Their reliability in Mexico City's altitude and pollution was legendary. The Mexican government even mandated that taxis be Beetles for a time. Production at the Puebla plant continued year after year, with subtle improvements but the same basic design. The result? While Americans moved on to minivans and SUVs, millions of people worldwide still depended on their Beetles for daily transportation. In Brazil, the Fusca was a national icon. In South Africa, the Beetle remained popular through the apartheid era and beyond. The car had transcended its origins completely. It was no longer German or American or Mexican. It was simply the people's car, exactly as intended, just not the people Hitler had in mind. Then came 1998 and Volkswagen's bold gamble, the new Beetle. Built on the Golf platform with a water-cooled engine up front and front-wheel drive, it shared nothing with the original except its visual inspiration. The design was retro-futuristic, capturing the essence of the original shape while adding modern safety and comfort. It was a fashion statement more than basic transportation. The engineering was completely different. The 2.0-liter four-cylinder engine produced 115 horsepower, nearly twice the original's output. Air conditioning was standard. The heater actually worked. ABS brakes, airbags, and crumple zones provided safety the original never could. The new Beetle was faster, safer, more comfortable, and more practical than the original in every measurable way. But something was lost in translation. The new Beetle attracted a different demographic. Where the original appealed to pragmatists and nonconformists, the new Beetle attracted nostalgists and fashion-conscious buyers. The base price of $15,200 in 1998, about $24,000 today, put it well above economy car territory. It was a lifestyle choice, not an economic necessity. Sales were respectable, but never approached the original's numbers. Volkswagen sold about 80,000 new Beetles annually in the United States at its peak, compared to over 400,000 originals in 1970. The 2012 redesign tried to recapture some of the original spirit. The roofline was flattened, the proportions more masculine. Volkswagen even offered a turbo version with 200 horsepower, but the market had moved on. Small cars were struggling across the industry. SUVs and crossovers dominated sales charts. The Beetle, even reimagined, couldn't compete. Then Dieselgate exploded in 2015. Volkswagen's admission that it had cheated on emissions tests for millions of diesel vehicles, including diesel Beetles, shattered the company's reputation. The company that had built its American success on honest advertising and German engineering was caught in a massive fraud. The trust that took decades to build evaporated overnight. Volkswagen paid over $30 billion in fines and settlements. The damage to the brand was incalculable. The Beetle became collateral damage. Sales, already declining, fell further. In 2018, the Beetle represented just 4% of Volkswagen's American sales. The business case was clear. In September 2018, Volkswagen announced the inevitable. Beetle production would end. No successor was planned. After 81 years, the people's car would finally retire. The last Beetle, number 5961, rolled off the line in Puebla, Mexico on July 10, 2019. It was a commemorative edition in stonewashed blue, destined for Volkswagen's museum in Puebla. Workers gathered to sing Las Golondrinas, a traditional Mexican farewell song. Some wept. The final Beetle looked almost identical to the first, separated by 8 decades of continuous evolution. The engine had grown from 985 cc to 2.0 liters. Power had increased from 25 to 174 horsepower, but the spirit remained unchanged. Let's talk about what the Beetle actually achieved. Over 21.5 million original Type 1 Beetles were produced, making it the best-selling single design in automotive history. Add the new Beetle's 1.7 million units, and total production exceeds 23 million. The Beetle was sold in 91 countries on every inhabited continent. It was manufactured in 15 different countries. For Volkswagen, it was the foundation that built a global automotive empire, but the numbers only tell part of the story. The Beetle democratized automobile ownership in countries where cars had been luxury items. It provided reliable transportation for millions of families. It enabled freedom of movement for young people. It served as taxis, delivery vehicles, police cars, and even race cars. The Beetle proved that good design transcends politics, culture, and time. The engineering legacy is equally profound. The Beetle pioneered efficient packaging, showing that small cars didn't have to be penalty boxes. The rear engine layout influenced everything from the Corvair to the Porsche 911. The platform strategy, using one basic design for multiple variants, became industry standard. The focus on continuous improvement rather than model changes influenced Japanese manufacturing philosophy. Even the advertising approach, selling intelligence over emotion, changed how cars were marketed. Consider the cultural impact. The Beetle appeared in countless films beyond Herbie. It was on the cover of Abbey Road. It was the centerpiece of Woody Allen's Sleeper. It carried the Griswold family's Christmas tree in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Artists from Andy Warhol to Keith Haring used the Beetle as a canvas. The car became a universal symbol of simplicity, rebellion, and individuality. So is the Beetle really dead? Not quite. While new production has ended, Millions of Beetles remain on roads worldwide. The restoration industry thrives. Parts are still manufactured. Specialist shops keep them running. Electric conversions give old Beetles new life. The passionate community of owners, collectors, and enthusiasts ensures Beetles will remain visible for decades. And there's reason to believe Volkswagen isn't done with the Beetle concept. The company's MEB electric platform could easily accommodate a Beetle revival. The ID. Buzz electric van proves Volkswagen understands the value of its heritage. As cities restrict internal combustion engines, a simple, affordable electric Beetle could find new relevance. The people's car for the electric age. The engineering principles that made the Beetle successful, simplicity, reliability, efficiency, affordability, remain relevant. While modern cars bristle with technology, there's growing appreciation for mechanical simplicity. The Beetle's less is more philosophy might be exactly what's needed as we reconsider mobility in an age of climate change and urban congestion. Think about what the Beetle represents. It's proof that great engineering isn't always about maximum performance or cutting-edge technology. Sometimes it's about solving real problems for real people. The Beetle succeeded not despite its limitations, but because of them. Every compromise forced clever solutions. Every constraint sparked innovation. The result was a car that did less but meant more. The Beetle's journey from Nazi propaganda tool to hippie icon to nostalgic fashion statement is unique in automotive history. No other car has been so many different things to so many different people. It was simultaneously a symbol of fascist ambition and flower power freedom. It represented German engineering excellence and Mexican manufacturing prowess. It was basic transportation and cult object, practical tool and cultural icon. In an era when cars are becoming rolling computers, when autonomous vehicles promise to eliminate driving entirely, the Beetle reminds us why cars matter beyond mere transportation. They're freedom machines, expression devices, family members. The Beetle proved a car could have personality, that engineering could have soul, that simple could be better than complex. The truth is, we'll never see another car like the original Beetle. The combination of circumstances that created and sustained it, post-war reconstruction, counterculture rebellion, pre-digital simplicity, can't be repeated. Modern safety and emissions regulations make such basic engineering impossible. Consumer expectations have evolved beyond acceptance of the Beetle's limitations. The world that needed the Beetle no longer exists. But the idea of the Beetle, affordable, reliable, classless transportation that brings joy through simplicity, remains powerful. Every startup promising to disrupt transportation echoes the Beetle's democratic ideals. Every car designed for developing markets follows the Beetle's playbook. Every vehicle that prioritizes function over fashion owes something to the people's car. The Volkswagen Beetle conquered the world not through force, but through humility. It succeeded not by being the best at anything, but by being good. Enough at everything. It proved that great engineering isn't always about pushing boundaries. Sometimes it's about finding the perfect balance within constraints. The Beetle was never the fastest, most comfortable, or most advanced car. It was simply the most honest car ever built. So when we remember the Beetle, we're not just nostalgic for a quirky old car. We're remembering a time when simplicity was valued, when durability mattered more than features, when cars had character instead of just technology. The Beetle reminds us that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one, that true innovation often means doing less, not more. What's your Beetle story? Did you own one? Learn to drive in one? Take a legendary road trip in one? Share your memories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, make sure to subscribe. We're just getting started exploring the amazing stories behind the machines that changed our world. Until next time, keep those engines running, whether they're in front, in back, or running on electrons.